Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to yet one more session on AI, but this time it's slightly different. It's about not AI, it's about AI of the future. So we're rethinking AI and discovery. Jeffrey Van Malson, an amazing entrepreneur, an amazing scientist who combines physical science with IT, and he is the founder of this company called Lila that we're going to hear a little bit more about and how they're going to change AI and its use in discovery. Jeffrey, sir, it's yours.
Thank
Go for
you,
it.
Pradeep. So this is meant to be a fireside chat, but I'm going to give you an overview of Lila to kick us off. And we'll open it up for questions as we go, so please pepper us with any and all comments on where you think the future of AI, science, and a lot more is headed. So as Pradeep mentioned, the company that I most recently started is Lila. And our mission is what you see here. It is to build scientific superintelligence to solve humankind's greatest challenges. That is, of course, a very aspirational mission, but it is obviously what is ahead of the field of science. I don't believe there's an empirical basis upon which to argue that this will not occur. And as anybody who's spent time in life science or material science will know, one of the most challenging aspects of science is that our brains really stink at understanding the way that biology really works and the way that three-dimensional arrangements of atoms dictate their functions in the world around us. And machines don't have some of those limitations. So in fact, the state of the art today is already super intelligent with respect to the way that machines have been able to model relationships between structures and their functions across many different regimes of science. And that is just the very beginning. The exercise that led to our mission resembles what are called the Hamming questions. Hamming was at Bell Labs, and he would either inspire or irritate scientists with the following three questions. The first question was, what are the most important challenges and opportunities in your field? Second question was, and what is it that you work on? And the third question was, why the hell is the answer to the second question distinct from the first? Depending on how wedded you were to working on something distinct from what you viewed to be the most important thing in the field, that would, of course, inspire or irritate. We believe this is perhaps the most important transition in the history of science, in that the very basis upon which humans conduct science more marvelously than the rest of the animal kingdom is human intelligence being higher than the rest of the life forms around us. So the reason, therefore, this will be a valuable era of science is straightforward. Not a single thing in our environments was invented by an organism other than humans. And if there are a few decimal points or a lot more intelligence to go beyond us, then in the not-so-distant future, the same will be true about scientific superintelligence. And the approach that inspired Lila was built on our applying generative AI into the languages of life, i.e. DNA, mRNA, protein design for the past 7 years. And we realized that in the first two steps of the scientific method, generative AI was providing a new kind of beautiful mind with which to understand the way the world works and propose a hypothesis. However, if you live in the world of therapeutics, you still have to build a couple hundred-person organization or much more with which to turn that into a few new prospective preclinical medicines every year. And that's because the rest of the wheel of science isn't nearly as smoothly lathed as those first two steps had started to become. I.e., the process of designing a decisive experiment for anybody that's worked in a lab can take months, years, or an indefinite period of time. The trials and tribulations of accurately carrying out that experiment are enormous. Even interpreting the results of an experiment can have a lot of voodoo involved. So the inspiration that led to Lila about 4 years ago was wondering whether we could build AI systems through which the entire wheel of the scientific method could be conducted by AI. I.e., AI models would be able to utilize tools with which to model the way that the world works. For example, the way that three-dimensional arrangements of atoms dictate whether they're a semiconductor, a superconductor, or a breakthrough in electrodes. Pose a hypothesis for some desirable technological aim, then autonomously design a decisive experiment, then on its own, with the help of robotics, automation, and instrumentation, run that experiment, interpret the results, and then at 4 o'clock in the morning, update the model that the first hypothesis had come from and set the next wheel in motion. So for 3 years, we've been, depending on whether we're speaking to companies we've purchased instruments from, either voiding warranties or simply using them in unconventional ways, so as to allow software and AI to run a few steps in a row of the scientific method. We've now started building the first of what we call AI science factories. So that's what you're seeing rendered here. We're building 7 of these this year across life science, chemistry, and material science. And you should think of this as all of the instruments that Pradeep would purchase if he was starting a new material science department at MIT or at UCSD or a new life science department, but connected with automation and robotics such that AI models can conduct every unit step of the scientific method. Now you're seeing the real thing. We think of this as like a Wright brothers moment in science, in that every single frontier of science has been occupied by human minds and hands thus far, and the supply of new human minds and hands takes years or decades of training and accumulation of expertise with which to augment the supply of brilliant individuals moving science forward. What this allows is science to transition into a regime that looks analogous to the ease with which one can scale a data center. Of course, it's not just GPUs and it's not just computing what we know. Instead, it's a new kind of computer with which the laws of gravity, physics, can be utilized so as to effectively answer questions that would be infeasible or impractical to derive answers from with GPUs. So as a quick analogy, the essence of what we're trying to build in Lila is the infrastructure with which AI models can take the approach that has led to superintelligence already in regimes like chess, Go, and other games. That strategy is not to have AI models simply train on all the games that humans have played so far. When you do that, the models do not become superintelligent. When you allow them to play the game themselves, they become vastly so. Effectively, autonomous science is the regime with which a new kind of mind can sit in the center of the scientific method. And by the end of this year, the 7 AI science factories that we build in Lila will have every data point from every experiment flowing into this sort of polymath or savant AI model sitting in the center of all of that. I am convinced that this is the future of something like 100% of science, and the time scale in which that's going to take place is within the next decade. So having spent more years of my life in the coal mine of pipetting fluids back and forth in life science labs, or trying to synthesize inorganic nanocrystals that that human eyesight with microscopes can't actually observe, I'm certain that there's a better mind and body for science. And the timescale of reference that you could think about this change taking place in is therapeutics company when they nominate the candidate that they plan to go into the clinic. With success in clinical trials, that usually takes a decade to achieve its first revenue. In the intervening period of time, our perspective is that all of science is going to change hands from the way we do it today, which if you've ever been in a self-driving car, looks remarkably antiquated. Like science videos in a lab look like a really bad Department of Motor Vehicles video from a few decades ago. That's the way we do it today. And that is going to change in ways that sometimes people imagine will diminish the scale of science but I believe it will be the opposite, in that for the foreseeable future, science is about to become way more fun. The reason science is not fun is because it's slow, laborious, and we play a complicated guessing game. The parameters of increasing the intelligence, scale, and the rate of science offer the prospect of changing all of those. And if you convert science from an artisanal process into something that can scale, then I believe there's also going to be something like a global scientific intelligence race. Now, AI science factories are still in the process of being invented, but if we quickly transition from Wright brothers to Boeing, i.e. where this can be scaled aggressively, then whomever builds the largest AI science factory, I believe will have the highest scientific intelligence on planet Earth. In that there will be more and more sensational things that come from AI models trained on the internet, but that is going to liberate enormous numbers of concurrently plausible hypotheses about how the world works and how it could, that will need to be ground truthed in this sort of infrastructure, and whomever is able to run the most brilliant next experiment at largest scale, fastest speed, and highest intelligence is going to be the leader in this next phase of science.
So I don't know if you have intrigued people more or scared people more. But I can tell you, like 2 years ago, when ChatGPT was announced, I was like really excited. I thought it was going to change many, many things. But when I talked to Jeff about 9 months ago about this company, I got excited one more time because it was going to fundamentally expand our ability to explore. So I think the important thing to understand is ChatGPT looks at existing knowledge and searches over all combinations of that to answer a question. My question to you is, how do you model the discovery of the future? How do you model to find what I don't know? Because in the scientific process, it is proposing a hypothesis and trying to negate the hypothesis that leads to discovery. It's not trying to prove the hypothesis. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So to just walk us a little conceptually, how does this work in the context, in the background?
Yeah, Pradeep just phrased that beautifully. If you were to oversimplify, much of the generative AI race taking place right now is implicitly extracting as much value as possible from what humans already know. That is an enormous amount of value, but it comes with the risk of widespread job elimination, given that if AI is simply mastering what we can already do, then any expressions and professional renditions of what's already known become vulnerable. Lila's mission is to do the inverse, which is to blaze new trails beyond the frontiers of what we know today. So what you need to be able to do that has commonality with the generative AI race and large language models and the amazing and growing feats of what those can do. You have to be able to access existing knowledge. You have to be able to reason with sophistication around that knowledge. And the reason reasoning models are excelling, particularly in domains like math and coding, is because one can computationally verify the suggestions of models so as to, on an ongoing basis, run reinforcement learning to improve the model's capabilities. The kinds of labs that we're building, you could think about as a large-scale verifier for AI models that are reasoning about the future, i.e. reasoning beyond what we know the answer to, but posing concurrently plausible hypotheses or hypotheses that are probabilistically similar about the way that materials work in inorganic materials, the way that a chemistry might work in medicine and other challenges.
So look, if you think about the scientific method and go back to Newton, it is the apple falling that forces him to think about why does it fall. So in this lab that you're building, what is the equivalent of apple falling? I mean, what are those sensors that are looking at stuff happening out there and trying to argue why is it happening, why is it not happening? Do you have like large-scale electronic microscopes, cryo-EMs? I mean, what are those observational tools that are looking at the world around? You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, there's a couple really important aspects to what Pradeep just asked. So one is the hierarchical idea realm of science is a terrain where we're really like just beginning to elaborate the capabilities of our AI models. Scientists dream, they imagine, they then pose with increasing amounts of specificity what they believe is possible and then bring those into the lab. Thus far, scientists at Lila have been doing those first few steps. They have been defining what directions we should point our AI models and our autonomous science system. I'll give you a couple of examples to try to bring it to light. So Lila's come out of a firm called Flagship Pioneering. Flagship is most famous for having started Moderna. So we've had close proximity to the decade and couple $1 billion of science that Moderna needed to be ready for the pandemic. We had 3 scientists at Lila who were not mRNA experts, desire to apply the autonomous science platform, to start from scratch without knowing the Moderna or BioNTech COVID vaccine designs, and in less than 6 months try to beat the performance of both of them. 4 months later, 3 non-mRNA experts had beaten them by 3-fold. That is 3-fold on the most important parameter for an mRNA vaccine, which is how many molecules of the desired protein do you produce per molecule of mRNA. That's also the most important parameter for any mRNA application for anything in medicine. Whether you're producing an antibody, a GLP-1, a rare disease protein that is missing, like that is the single thing that you are trying to optimize. So the implicit time and resource contraction of that accomplishment is large. I gave another example this morning in material science. Right. But what both of those are doing is teams of scientists are able to set their ideas in motion and then utilize AI systems that can model the way that that component of the world works, i.e. Model the language of mRNAs in nature, propose a set of initial hypotheses, and then upon observing the results of, in this case, the expression of protein that every single one of those mRNAs is capable of, it then updates the model and unleashes the next batch of hypotheses. Even when we started with random sequences, the AI models still beat Moderna and BioNTech by a multiple in less than 6 months. In that it learns rules that we humans with prior technologies would not have ever observed. And in fact, these mRNAs look quite different from mRNAs in nature or ones that humans have designed previously.
So talk a little bit about the hydrogen economy and how you figured out from non-material scientists like to produce hydrogen the one example you gave this morning.
So Pradeep's mentioning the example that I described this morning. And the infrastructure that allowed that mRNA demo is very similar to the AI science factories that we're using to discover new peptides, to discover new antibodies. It's a distinct set of instruments with which we're playing the game of science with materials. But we had 2 scientists suggest that we take on a challenge in green hydrogen, which was to try to invent electrodes that could be 1,000 times less expensive than the commercial standards for green hydrogen electrolysis today, which are platinum group metals, specifically iridium. Platinum group metals and iridium are expensive and scarce. We had an MIT professor and a Caltech professor who both advised we not work on that problem. They believe it is important, but by their estimation, it would take a decade for the 100 or so labs that work on that challenge around the world to achieve a result like the team was aiming for. So 2 scientists attempting to do it inside of this little startup called Lila that was in stealth mode, they thought was unwise. 3 months later, almost every 2 weeks, the team was discovering a new Earth-abundant electrode composition that was 1,000 to 14,000 times less expensive than the commercial standard for green hydrogen production today, and higher performing than any known non-platinum group metals. So the most fun part of this is that both the MIT professor and the Caltech professor have chosen to join Lila full-time on the basis of what a surprise it was that the platform could do this.
So I want to get to company formation. So clearly, I can imagine you going to a venture capitalist and pitching this idea, and the person looking at you and thinking you're a crazy guy. But I can also imagine that somebody was visionary, like Jamie, for example, and saying, oh, wait a second, I have some money to spend, I'm going to invest in you. So tell us what happened. How did this get formulated? How did the company get seeded?
So we raised a seed financing last year that we haven't announced, but it's an unusually large seed round. It's just over $200 million. In fact, this week we'll be announcing the company for the first time. So stay tuned for Lila.ai to...
So you are special, okay? You're hearing this before the public announcement.
Yeah. In fact, it's fun to talk about it. I've just had this floating around in my mind in secrecy for 3 years. The essence of what we've observed, that a single AI model can be connected to the scientific method at such large scale, and implicitly, therefore, the degree to which you can amortize an aggressive investment into increasing scientific intelligence and solving the problems for autonomous science against the entire continuum of multi-trillion-dollar materials markets, trillion-dollar chemistry markets, and trillion-dollar therapeutics markets is the essence of why I believe we've been able to secure the resources that we have thus far. And the speed with which this has conferred the kind of advantages with small teams of scientists just kind of playing around with it over the past 2 years has as well.
And how many people in the company?
So now we're about 200, but for most of the past 3 years, less than
But if you just take a step back and
Sorry,
think,
we're about 100. I think
oh, 100.
100, yeah, sorry.
Okay, maybe in 2 years it'll be 200. So if you just look back and take a step back and see what Jeffrey is saying, we can now do 10x the science with 1/10 the number of people, like literally, which means that the exponential rate of discovery could lead to that much faster growth in wealth. I mean, we can generate wealth in a very big way if all of this works, right? So what I'm concerned about is this looks like the arms race now. So ChatGPT was the arms race to begin with, and comes DeepSeek. And now you put this out in the market. How long before, like how many countries will be able to play this game and really start dominating the production of technology, the dominance in technology, and the wealth generation?
Yeah, the arms race in GPUs right now is stunning. I presume this group is aware of the somewhat like $1 trillion of recent announcements into planned installation of US data centers over the next 4 years. That is unlikely to subside. One could have two mental models with respect to where science goes from here. One is that with a sufficiently sized data cluster and the internet stuffed into it, that no one ever needs to run another experiment again. All of science is deterministic. Everything that is possible is understood. All human ancestors and descendants are modelable. Every disease is cured. I think the probability of that is approximately 0. In large part because there's only so many Bill Nye the Science Guy videos online, and there's even less high-quality data on the frontiers of science that are very important. For example, in the past 3 years, Lila has designed, constructed, and tested coming up on about 100,000 mRNAs in human cells and preclinical models. The total internet and academic literature we think is probably 1,000 times smaller than that. So there's going to be a very high, I believe, need for new data for science to do what's possible. That leads to the second model, which is that generative AI models trained on publicly available data will do more and more sensational things, but they're going to release these avalanches of hypotheses of what could be. And whomever can run the scientific method at largest scale, fastest speed, and highest intelligence is going to have an advantage. So I believe what we're seeing in data centers right now, we will see in the coming years in what you can think about as an experimental cluster or variations of what we're trying to create in Lila of AI science factories.
So I did promise you that I'll let you ask a question or two. Anybody have a question out there? Yes, sir. Wait, what is the equivalent of dreaming in, please, thank you.
You mentioned dreaming, and that's what scientists do at night, you know, or during, or some event will happen, like an apple falling from a tree, and that sparks some creativity. What's the equivalent in AI for that to happen? Because with ChatGPT, it seems like you can ask a question, you can fill in knowledge pockets in your head, but it's within the known realm of the universe of what's knowable in the U.S. I mean, in the world. What's the equivalent of that in your and where? How does it break the boundary of what's known?
Yeah. So the very basis of large language models is predicting the most probable next token in a string. What that implies is that as you layer more and more sophistication and reasoning capabilities on that, you are still being entrained within the consensus view of science. What is most probable for the scientific literature to establish as consensus on a given topic? And we are nowhere near having a mastery of important scientific domains. In fact, our mastery of it should be thought of as closer to zero than it is to determinism. Most of what we know is either incomplete or objectively incorrect. The observations of hallucinations in LLMs could be thought of as a form of dreaming, form of creativity. Those are, of course, unproductive if you have a co-pilot at a surgical suite or, you know, with a physician making real-time decisions. When a lab is verifying truth, it's not evident that those are unproductive. In fact, enriching, you know, the temperature and variations of how models deviate from dogma is going to be really important. We've just added a member of our team who joins us from having led a team called the Open-Endedness team at OpenAI. He wrote a book 10 years ago that has influenced my perspective on innovation more than almost anything that I've read. It's called Why Greatness Cannot Be Planned. And effectively what he described in the book, and he's been pursuing ever since, is an algorithm that is focused on first creating effectively an anti-vector away from existing knowledge and towards novelty, and then imposing laws of thermodynamics or reasonableness or other titrations. But the step one is to deviate from what is known. He has the best perspective that I've experienced for where AI models fall down in trying to dream. And I think just as now terminology of reasoning models is becoming commonplace, I believe we will have commonplace terminology introduced as AI models evolve imagination, as they evolve, you know, the capacity to dream and more.
Anybody else? So as you were asking the question, I was wondering, do you think that this strategy that you're following will ever discover theory of relativity? You see what I'm saying?
Go to the ultimate test.
Yeah, right.
I hold that at, you know, if you can hold constant the circumstances of, you know, of Einstein's environment,
right,
and suggest really any of his major contributions to the field, then AI is really in a special place. I don't see a reason to believe that it can't. It cannot today.
No, actually, I agree with you. So, you know, a lot of people think that it was a major jump, but it turns out most of science is incremental, even though things that look like a major jump are a major jump to people who are not in the field. But if you look at the history of science, it's all incrementally adding to knowledge and leading to nonlinear effects, right? So I think you're right. I think it will, but I don't know what theory it will discover.
Well, and as you know from the arrangement of innovation ecosystems today, effectively the most innovative nodes in the world today are small teams of people learning as best they can from the past and then proposing a bold idea about the future. That's the way all of academia is composed. It's one of the major benefits that small startups have had. What this regime changes is if every single experiment can continually flow into a model that doesn't forget and can synthesize knowledge across disparate regimes, then all of a sudden there are scale relationships between the scale of an organization and its intelligence and its capacity to discover. That is going to create a huge evolutionary force, and I'd love to hear the way you think about.
No, I think you're right. So I think this session is really an intersection between philosophy, scientific discovery, human intelligence, artificial intelligence, and the congruence of all of this, or the confluence of all of this, and where it's going. I would have loved to carry this conversation more, but we are out of time. So say a big thank you to Jeffrey Van Wilson. So, thank you, everybody.
Thank you all.